it's Drybear. And we need to talk about the healer strike protest that's going on right now in Final Fantasy XIV just before the release of the new expansion, Dawn Trail. Now, this has actually been going on for quite a while if you've been paying attention to the growth of Final Fantasy XIV ever since its initial launch basically 10 years ago. And I've even put out a video recently going over the difficulty versus the ease of Final Fantasy XIV and the direction it's been heading in. Not that Final Fantasy XIV is an easy game to play by any means, but the direction they've been molding the game to over the last few expansions, trying to make it more accessible, more available, and easier to get into, and also to cater a little bit to the input from the console audience, being able to limit their options for input and that sort of thing. So this has actually gotten to a fever pitch where there's now an official manifesto and an official healer strike for all mains of healer jobs in Final Fantasy XIV, saying they want change and they didn't get it in Dawn Trail and they're upset. Now, healers have been feeling this way for a couple years, like I've mentioned, and this has been building and building to a fever pitch, and it actually was kicked off to a more serious conversation from this video here. So this is from Zeno. He is a primary content creator for Final Fantasy XIV. He went to the official media tour at Squeenix so he could actually see the new expansion, the new content, and he posted a video where they basically did a 4-man dungeon content without any healer. So they played a warrior tank, which is known for having a lot of self-sustain and self-healing, and then 3 DPS, a dragoon, a ninja, and a red mage as part of that dungeon. But they were able to clear this leveling dungeon without needing a healer at all, without feeling any struggle or any purpose. And this is kind of like I guess it's more of a tentpole moment for the healers that have been feeling frustrated over the lack of value that they feel that they're bringing to the game as of this moment. So if you jump over to the forums, you can see that this started a very long and lengthy conversation, has 31 pages on the Final Fantasy XIV forums right now, where they say that they cleared a dungeon without any healers, and this is just sad, and their changes aren't being made. And they actually even started going into detail on some of the character creations. We know that Rampart, a lot of the defensive mechanisms for the 4 tank jobs in 14 have been increased in Dawn Trail, so they're getting the ability to tank themselves better. This person on the forums has gone through all of the DPS classes and jobs, going over all the different ways that every job has a way to keep themselves alive. They can increase their healing, they can increase their self-sustain, they can even give themselves damage reduction, and there's a lot of mechanics that can be outright dodged. And so justifiably, many of the healer mains that play the 4 healer jobs in Final Fantasy XIV are complaining that their role just feels useless, that they don't actually have a purpose, they don't actually have a reason to be there. And this is compounded by the fact that in order to give more overhead and room for these healer players to be able to focus on other people's health bars, keep them alive, predict damage, and deal with that, their DPS rotation so that they can contribute to the damage of the overall encounter is greatly simplified to the point where most healer jobs in the game only really have to spam one button, either one button in single target or a different one button in AoE. Some of the healers sometimes apply a dot with a long cooldown, but for the most part, they're just hitting the same key over and over, and it's rather brainless. So if the healing isn't enough to keep them engaged and their DPS is very mindless, what else are they supposed to do? We know that paladins can raid heal and group heal. We know that warriors can keep themselves alive. Dark Knights can even shield other people. So what's going on with the healers? And as that forum thread started getting bigger and bigger and people started saying, hey, yeah, this doesn't feel right, there is now another thread that has gone over 317 pages that includes a manifesto for what the healers are demanding for changes in later updates for Dawn Trail, as well as an overall petition that you can sign that is hashtag FFXIV healer strike. So the healers are just livid with the conditions that they're in. So let's look at their manifesto. Most of it is actually quite reasonable, that we've already mentioned a little bit of as well. The first one is self-sustain and healing abilities given to other roles. They don't like the fact that there's too many other ways for jobs to not rely on healers. This definitely makes the game feel better for DPS because they can actually take a little bit of damage and be part of that rotation. And also when they're out in the overworld doing fates and quests and stuff like that, when they take damage, they can keep themselves alive a little bit. But in a given raid situation, whether it's a 4-man, an 8-man, or an alliance raid, they have less reliance on the healer because they do have ways to keep themselves alive, and they want to see changes in that department. Oversimplification of DPS rotations, we talked about this already a little bit, but the fact that the healers have a intentionally simplified rotation because they are the ones that have to pay attention to other players the most. Tanks have to do it a little bit. DPS don't really have to do it as much, depending on what DPS job you're talking about, but they still have to pay a little bit of attention. And then the healers have to pay a ton of attention on where are people standing? Are they about to take damage? Are they standing in an AoE that might kill them? Can I bubble them? If you're a shielding healer, can I heal them or precast a heal? If you're a major upfront healing type job, or can I deal with major mechanics? Is there a big raid wide coming in where I have to bubble everyone in and try to keep them alive? And they're thinking about that all the time. And because they have to worry about other players, their DPS rotation is dead simple, so they can kind of do it in the background while they're doing it. This one I generally don't agree with. This one is homogenization of healer jobs, so making them all the same. There's no individuality across the jobs in the healer role to give them a sense of identity. I think I disagree on this. I think that this used to be the case, but I would say that since Sage was added to the game, I'm actually pretty happy with the diversity of the healers. White Mage is your traditional, like, age-old healer. You know, get more support, bubbling, and pet management with Scholar. More buffs and more of that kind of buff tower position with Astrologian, who also happens to have a lot of very instant cast heals. So while they're focusing on cards, especially with the new card mechanic, which is a little bit more involved, they can focus those instant heals, and then like they can prime up preemptive heals that build up in AoE, and then they can pop them at a certain time. And I think Sage kind of has a mixture of all of those with a little bit more focus on shielding, which can be super cool. Excessive OGCD heals. These two just feel like personal gripes rather than like a manifesto to make healers better. But the excessive OGCD heals are not only abundant, but exceptionally powerful. This, in addition to self-sustain other roles, reduces the dynamic of healing comrades. I think that this is important because if you have a healer that has a no instant cast or off global cooldown heals, then there are going to be some encounters that they just simply won't be able to heal. It's just not going to be possible for them. They won't be able to do it because if the movement happens at a certain time, you're going to get to a point where you might choose other healers like Astrologian over that job because they don't have the ability to react to instant damage, and it also limits the kind of encounters that they can design at Squeenix. Then lack of threat level in nearly all forms of content. I would agree with this one. And I think that this applies to basically all content except for maybe ultimates or including Savage Raids, but Savage Raids probably more on progression than on farming. I think even ultimates on farm or Savage Raids on farm, like when everyone knows what they're doing and they're doing the damage and they're prepared and they're involved and everything's kind of figured out already, they're just kind of doing the dance and stepping the steps. I don't think that there's not, the healing job and the tank job, by the way, gets a lot more simple-minded because you've already figured out what you're going to do before you do it, and you're not racing against time to do the best possible DPS, though tanks and healers still need to do good DPS from that. They mentioned the strike is a protest, as such is not intended to interrupt the game or the players, but they do want big change on the healers. And this discussion is continuing on the Reddit and several other forums, even on social media platforms and on live streaming platforms, going on the healer issues. This is all very relevant and real. So people that have been maining healers for a long time, especially from the very beginning of the game, have watched this down decline. Now, keep in mind that I do believe, and that's why I made that other video, that there has been this simplification of Final Fantasy XIV over time for all roles, not just for healer. I think they've just been generally trying to make the game more accessible and easier to play for people. There still is, I think when a new Savage Raid, a new Ultimate Raid releases, there still is a significant difficulty curve for doing that. Doesn't mean that not everyone can do it. If you put in the time, you still can, but it is incredibly hard to get those things done right. But if we're talking about dungeon clearing, which is the dungeon that we saw Xeno clear on the media tour without a healer, and even just general leveling content or very entry-level content, most of that is you can kind of just slip and slide your way through it and get through it just fine. And I think that's by design. They want the game to be so easy that people can enjoy the story, they can enjoy the social aspects, and there's no gatekeeping outside of, ultimates and savages and some specific time required raids and encounters. So there has been that sliding, whether it's healer, DPS, or tank. Go back to ARR, healing scale off of mine and damaging spells, and then they've removed that. They've been removing some of the DPS options for some. Scholar used to have a really cool DPS rotation. Now it's very, very boring and very straightforward, as with all of them are. And this person also brings up a very good point that I actually agree with as well, is that, things like Asuna, the ability to cleanse a nearby target of some kind of debuff or dot that might be on them, was actually pretty serious in early Final Fantasy XIV. There were some dungeons where you would get a doom debuff or some kind of debuff that would actually outright just kill your character if it wasn't cleansed in time. And they've slowly just been removing those over time to the point where, like, in Endwalker and Stormbringers, and probably even in Dawntrail, some healers don't even have the Asuna, the cleansing ability, on their bar. So I think that's definitely part of it. They're even mentioning things like in 8.0, the next expansion after Dawntrail, they might want to remove the DPS classes or jobs that can resurrect. Right now it's Summoner and Red Mage that can resurrect. So if you're both your healers or your only healer goes down and you have a Summoner or a Red Mage in your party or your alliance or your raid or whatever, they can actually res the healer, and then the healer can go and res everybody else. They are saying that they might want to get rid of that as well. So going into the next expansion after Dawntrail, it's possible that only healers will have that resurrect. But do you agree with this manifesto? Do you think that healing is in a good spot for Final Fantasy XIV? And what do you expect for Dawntrail? Is this something that is going to continue to get worse? And are, the voices that are being shouted at the top of the lungs right now in the right vein? Or are they actually just justified in feeling like healers are just getting shafted right now? If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.